Right, ladies and gentlemen. So at one point, I said that I wanted to make a crossbow, and I said that I was going to make a couple of different types of risers. One is like this, where you just put a piece of wood through it, shove the whole rod through the middle, or you can do it a second way, which I've already showed, where you put one block underneath that forces it up against this side, then another block that's where the hole is drilled on the bottom, so it forces it to come out down here, and then another in the middle, relatively from the middle, go halfway and make your second block there. And then the third one drilled perfectly centered so that it has to come out the center, and you'll have a like a reflex deflex bow. They do come out stronger that way. But the more tension you put them under, the more it rips these caps apart. And I found that no matter how I did the caps, they end up coming apart, even on weaker bows. But on really strong bows, they end up getting moved around quite a bit. So I gave some thought to what it was I wanted to do about that, and I decided on this. So these are the connectors from tent poles. Now, I've been using tent poles for a while for arrows, as is evidenced here, and in many of my videos, especially the earlier ones. And these are connectors that I had removed so that I could use the bare shafts, but I didn't throw them away. I kept them because with me, projects, you never know when I might use these. I'm really glad I kept these. These turned out to be really handy. So in front of me is everything you need to make one of these. What you do is you drill out your block, you fit these in, hammer them in place. In this case, they're on an angle. In this case, they're straight. You can do it either way, but I wanted this one to have a shelf that sits here so that as I'm shooting, it's in the right position and it works out very well. On this one, it's actually set up to be on an odd angle like that so that it gives me a shelf, but the corner of this sits in my hand and it works very well. I can shoot it in either case where this is bowed away from me to act like a recurve and make it stronger, or where it's bowed towards me for it to be weaker, depending on the specific risers. You might think, but no, the risers, these two are actually exactly the same length. Okay. But the limbs are different. So we've got a couple different materials. We've actually got 4 different materials here at different lengths. We've got 16-inch, 18-inch, 20-inch, and 22-inch. And in the end, you'll notice that in each case, one of them is slightly longer than the other. And the reason is that is to induce a situation where one limb is slightly stronger than the other. That's actually a good thing. It's the top limb that is the longer limb. So you can keep it separated that way. And then the top of your riser will be depending on where your rest is. In my case, this is the top of the riser. So as long as I put my top limb in the top of the riser, it works out great. So I wanted to show you guys how this has come out. And the reason is it's actually come out really well. This has been used with 3 of these. And I actually set up this one on the new one when I built it. So that's this one. And I had a little problem where this is actually pretty thick, this particular material, and it's a little thicker than these others. And because it is noticeably thicker, it means that whereas this one has too much play, and that play can induce damage in the rod, a little bit of tape will fix that. This one's a little too big. So what I've done is I'm going to open this up a little bit. You can do that with either a body reamer, but I don't recommend it because it'll wreck your body reamer. I actually recommend drill bit, which is what I'm going to use, just to trumpet this out a little bit on each end and make it easier to slip these in for if you're using the fatter ones. But I cannot use the big ones. They do not fit, not even close. You got to stick to the diameter that's here or use something else for your donor pieces. Now, if you were to go to a hardware store, you can find metal tubes of the diameter that fits your rod, slide them together, and as long as you can slide one inside the other without a lot of play, you want less than a millimeter of play. In fact, I would recommend about less than half a millimeter. If you got about a 1/4 mil of play, that's pretty good. You want a friction fit if you can get it. If not, but you could go with a 1/4 millimeter. Up to that or so is okay. Any more than that, you start inducing damage here. So, couple things there, but in the end, it's worked out really well. Even at the longest length, it's actually a really nice strength. But given that these are a little thicker, they should be stronger. But because they're longer, it has a much better draw length, and it actually is one of my favorites. I like these ones right here, and they are going to go on to this riser once I bevel it out. But any of these can go on, and that's the real trick. I have a riser, and I have a backup riser. And the reason I do is, well, it's a survival bow setup, right? So I don't recommend you make one. You got a hockey stick you're going to use that could definitely give you 2 risers. If you're using a tent that's a discarded tent, you've got the poles, there's more than 2 of these on there. You could definitely make a pair of these. And if you're buying a package of rods, you could get individual ones and get a couple different sizes and lengths and stiffnesses that fit, and that way you can make your limbs. And between picking the material and the thickness and picking the length, you get a ton of control over how strong your bow ends up being, and you can easily experiment and swap out limbs over time as you evolve and want a stronger bow. So that's it for this one. I just figured I'd give you guys the heads up, because these ones are harder to make than the others. They're not the easiest ones to do, really. These have to be on the correct angle. If you want them straight, they have to be straight or relatively so. In fact, in my case, I actually have them set up so they are pretty straight, but this one needs to be kind of banged over a little bit, but not so much. You might think that, but not really, because once I line it up and set everything up, it actually just sets the top of the limb just over to the left. And when I set my tiller right, I've shot it, it actually works really well and gives me a lot of clearance on the shelf, which is what I want. I kind of want a nice little slot here where the arrow can sit, and that actually works. I find if this is leaned even just straight up, the arrow tends to want to fall off, but with this leaned over or this leaned up, it doesn't happen. But when this is leaned up on a slight angle down, you lock in the arrow, but then you're ripping off the fletchings. So I find this is a nice solution too. It keeps the rods from being damaged. Typically, if the rods are exposed, like in this, when you're firing up against that riser all the time, you will wear a hole right in it, and eventually it'll snap. So this solves that. It's not as pretty because they don't come flush, but if they do come flush, you lose the protection here, and I wanted the protection. So in both cases, the top of the riser has the shelf, and this is leaned over in that direction, and that's actually the reason that I did it. It makes it a lot easier to get my shelf nice and smooth, and keeps the top limb out kind of out of the way. It's just a nice setup for me. It works really well. But how you index it will depend on how you plan on holding the bow in your hand. In my case, I did this and realized I had a shelf in both directions and it was comfortable in both directions, so I did it. This one I kind of like because I can play around and I have a big shelf area here that gives me a lot of room. So I actually will have it bowed like this, where the bottom limb angles out a little bit like that, and the top one angles the other direction. And when you actually see it bowed, you'll see what I mean. It doesn't throw things off the way you would think because it ends up being on an angle like this. And it just kind of, well, you'll see. When I'm done, this will be how the bow sits. It looks like these aren't level, but they actually are. It's the riser that's not. So it looks like these are off kilted, but as soon as you put it on an angle, you see that they're pretty straight to each other, the two inserts, and the whole thing sits on this kind of an angle, which is actually perfect. And I found while angling this up helps the arrow stay in place, angling it down helps it come off and helps it not wreck the fletchings. So by angling this a little over and this a little down, it facilitates both, and I can have it stay on the rest while still having it come off the rest easily and not wreck the fletchings. Anyway, that's it for this one, guys. It's getting close to 10 minutes. I just thought I'd give you a heads up on how this is working. The next step will be to make a handle so that I can lock in if I choose to do one like that. But now that I've gotten into it, I don't think I'm going to, because just by shortening the limbs, I can make it as strong as I would want it. And I really like this setup. Instead of carrying around a crossbow, I can just carry around different sets of limbs and an extra riser. And it means I basically have, 4 bows worth of limbs and a pair of risers in a really small package that only takes up, well, a very, very small space, about the length of a set of tent poles. So the tent pole bag that you use when you donate this, keep it. It's your bow bag. In fact, I have one here, guys. So I'm going to take a look at that. And this one wouldn't fit the actual poles. This one's not for the poles. It's actually for the clips, the tent pegs themselves rather than the poles. But I have another one like this for the poles that is around, that I actually already have in use. And this is going to be for the risers, and the other one matches this. So this one will have the risers in it, and the other one will have these, and the two can be tucked in together, but they'll stay separated so these don't get all scratched up. It makes for a really nice setup, guys. That being said, it's cheap, it's easy DIY, it's just up my alley. But it comes out solid, a lot more solid than these. They are more likely to damage the rods, but they are the more easily replaced part. The work is in the riser. So putting an hour's work into a riser, well, it took me about the same amount of time to build this riser as it did to build this. They both have wood inserts. It's not much of a difference. I had to drill out the ends either way to put the rod in. The difference is I just drill it out with a bigger drill bit and stick this in. Epoxy it all in place, lock it solid before you do anything, and shim it so that it's straight or on whatever angle you decide to put it on. What I recommend is you actually take it in your hand, hold it the direction you want, which is what I do, then bow it. See what position that puts these in. And you might do like I did and be surprised and find out that this is the perfect angle. You see how that's straight from my perspective? You'll see when you look at it, the limbs actually stick out very straight and in line with each other. And this is slightly offset, but that's perfect because it kicks my arrow shelf over and it makes it really fit nicely. The same is true of this one. When you really look, and I'm holding it in my hand, they're actually straight in line with each other, and it's the riser that's angled. That's what I wanted. But that effect looks weird until you put the limbs onto it. Anyway, here in front of me is everything you need. And all you need to do is pick a piece of wood that's about the length of your riser minus a little bit. You want to have that little bit of room so it locks off in. And then you fill that space up with epoxy. So this gap here, you're going to fill that all with epoxy. You're going to drill your holes, test fit everything, pull them out, fill with epoxy, enough to hold it in place, then drop it all down, lock that in place. But don't fill the inside of this shaft. It's okay to fill the bottom, but you want to leave plenty of room for that to lock inside. But you can see this is going really deep inside of this wood block here. So at this point, to have that much sticking out, you can see we've got a lot of material covered. We're looking 2.5 inches here, but that's good. I don't recommend any less than that to really lock it in place. I find less than that, and it just shreds the whole piece of wood that you put in there. And this has been the first time I've done this without the wood cracking. And it's to have both of these have the same thing going on, as you can see when you look inside. It's one solid piece of wood. There's nothing else going on in here. It's just one solid piece of wood, solidly epoxied in place with these end caps in. And because of that, it makes it a fairly quick build, guys. These others, they were more complicated. They actually took as much time to build. But in this one, I spent my time cutting and shaping the block of wood to make it fit. You want a friction fit, but you don't want it too tight. I had both of these tight enough that I did not have to epoxy them in. And I don't recommend that you do. I recommend you make them friction fit, because once you epoxy in your end caps, it's good to go. And if you ever did have to break it out, you could take this out pretty easily because it's at the ends. But anything in here, you're never going to be able to get to that. So in the interest of maintenance, I've decided to do it this way. And after testing, I found that it's more than strong enough. It works amazing. So in the next video, I will show you guys some shooting of these. I still have to streak the strings and to make the nocks and all that good stuff. So I'm not ready for that yet. Also, One of these is still curing. You could see it was sitting over there. One of the limb pockets was still curing. But now that that's finished, we're good to go. Keith out.